Busted.
The reviews are in.
Awesome.
You wanted more Joe Concha. And we heard you. More Joe. More show.
We're talking to you. Under promise and over deliver.
Joe Concha. Weeknights at 9. Plus Sunday mornings at 11 on 77 WABC.
Jimmy Kimmel no longer tries to be funny. Not that he ever really was.
Joe Concha. Weeknights at 9. Plus Sunday mornings at 11.
Democrats defending cocaine coming into the country.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Roger Stone Show. You know, math was never my strong suit. I actually thought it was 6 years ago today that 29 heavily armed FBI agents stormed my home at 6 o'clock in the morning to arrest me for the entirely fabricated crime of lying to Congress regarding Russian collusion, which we now know definitively, based on the documents declassified by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, never actually happened. Of course, they had in tow with them a CNN camera crew because a Fort Lauderdale police officer had called me on my cell phone to kind of give me the heads up that there were 29 FBI agents at a nearby Starbucks, and they said they were headed to my home. I responded that I had been expecting them, which I had. I was arrested in this manner because the FBI and the Department of Justice insisted that I was a flight risk. This despite the fact that they knew I did not have a valid passport, and although I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, I did not have a gun in the house. Of course, all of that was disproved 5 hours later when I was arraigned, and the government asked for no bail. So if I was a flight risk, why was I released on my own recognizance? I went through, of course, a Soviet-style show trial in Washington, D.C. My defense attorneys asked the judge, Judge Amy Berman Jackson, for a full and unredacted copy of Robert Mueller's final report, which she denied to them, saying that she would read the relevant sections about me in her chambers and give them to my attorneys. Somehow she managed to miss the part on page 178 in which Mueller himself could not sugarcoat the fact that he found no evidence of Russian collusion, no evidence of WikiLeaks collaboration. And he went on to say that even if he had found evidence that I had received anything from WikiLeaks, which he hadn't, then it would not have been a crime, that it would have been a First Amendment protected activity. So I was targeted really not because I did anything wrong, but because I refused to testify falsely against President Donald Trump. Aaron Zelinsky, the extraordinarily arrogant federal prosecutor handling my case, told two different federal judges that the government had probable cause to charge me with treason, conspiracy against the United States, money laundering, counterfeiting, mail fraud, wire fraud, unauthorized access to a government computer, as well, of course, as assisting a felony both before and after the fact. The judges, of course, granted him full access to all of my emails and text messages, and after going through 1 million messages, they could find no evidence of any of those crimes. So Andrew Weissman, the epically corrupt federal prosecutor who was the de facto head of the Mueller investigation, cooked up this process crime of lying under oath to Congress, except in order to violate the False Statements Act, which would have been a misstatement to Congress under oath, it has to be both willful, but it also has to be material. In other words, I would have had to lie to cover some underlying crime, such as Russian collusion. But there was no underlying crime, and therefore this was a fabrication meant to pressure me to testify falsely against the president. Adding insult to injury, the judge not only gagged me, but she also gagged every member of my family, my wife, my children, my extended family. Also, she gagged my quote-unquote supporters, all of which, of course, is unconstitutional. Nowhere does it say that if you're charged with a crime, you lose your free speech rights. But the worst part of this, of course, is that not only did I lose my voice and my ability to defend myself, I also lost, therefore, my ability to make a living, because I make a living by writing and speaking, largely, and I was not allowed to do any of that. Over time, because of the horrendous legal fees, my wife and I lost everything. We lost our home, we lost our insurance, we lost our savings, I had to sell my car, I had to sell my prized Fender Precision electric bass guitar, which I'd had since high school. And I admit to you today that it is only through my redemption in the blood of the cross, my return to the church, and my fervent prayers to Jesus Christ and to God Almighty that President Donald Trump ultimately saw that I was being persecuted, not because I'd done anything wrong, because he knew there was no Russian collusion hoax, but because I refused to testify falsely against him. It's interesting that just this past week, Michael Cohen, former general counsel to the Trump organization, who would become a witness and an attacker against Donald Trump, said in an interview that he was pressured by New York Attorney General Letitia James and Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg to testify against Trump. But let me point out that Cohen was charged with his own discretions. In other words, tax fraud by Michael Cohen, other business fraud by Michael Cohen, having nothing to do with Donald Trump. So on this day, I thank God for his redemption, for him lifting me up and ultimately saving me from my persecutors. It was on Election Day 2020, the busiest media day of the year, after a federal judge ordered the Department of Justice to release the full unredacted report that proved I was innocent, that the Justice Department put out a press release at midnight that night. For anybody who understands how media relations work in this country, if you want something not to be read, you put it out at midnight on the busiest media day of the year. But commemorating today, which is actually the 7th anniversary of my horrific arrest, in which they terrorized my wife and my family and put us into 2 years of unmitigated hell. I thank God for my redemption. I thank God for my unconditional pardon. And, of course, I thank President Donald Trump for having the courage to recognize that the case against me was entirely and totally political, and that I had done nothing wrong, as a famous T-shirt said. The entire country is, of course, now focused on Minnesota, where a fatal shooting involving a federal immigration officer in Minneapolis happened on Saturday, further adding to tensions as left-wing groups occupy the streets and provoke ICE as part of their ongoing effort to undermine immigration enforcement. This particular incident left 37-year-old Alex Pretty dead after a confrontation with an 8-year Border Patrol veteran. Pretty appeared to be using Antifa-style tactics designed to physically disrupt arrests, measures that, when deployed, dramatically increase the risk of deadly outcomes for everyone involved. Julie Kelly summed this up on X when she points out that Pretty is on video directing SUVs to form a barricade on the street, which is what prompted the first confrontation with the ICE officers, which means he was actively impeding, obstructing federal officers, which is a felony under 18 U.S.C. Code 111. It's also a crime to conspire to obstruct or impede federal officers. Priddy was working with at least one other individual at the time, and he was committing that felony while in possession of a firearm. Priddy also, by his actions, was attempting to aid a criminal illegal evading law enforcement. He then assaulted a woman after being hit by pepper spray, presumably disoriented from the spray. He had a loaded gun in his waistband. His parents had cautioned him not to get aggressively involved in anti-ICE protests, but this was not a protest. It was a crime. I've watched this video multiple times. It's funny how it's almost like Rashomon, that famous Japanese noir movie, where two people can see the exact same video and see different things. I very clearly see Mr. Petty remove his gun from the holster, thus menacing the officers, after which he was shot. This goes to a broader question as to what's happening on the ground in Minnesota. Governor Tim Walz, that's right, Tampon Tim, he mobilized the National Guard, but then to no one's surprise, the National Guard is being used to shield and protect the protesters and to clear a no-go zone that the radicals have taken up in a central part of the city of Minnesota. One such group, Minnesota Ice Watch, has circulated a so-called de-arrest primer, a manual that explicitly instructs activists on how to yank suspects from officers' hands, how to strike officers' grips, how to push police off of detainees, how to open law enforcement vehicles and surround officers until they, quote-unquote, cave. The manual chillingly describes each forced release as a micro-intifada, framing street violence as revolutionary action. To me, these tactics are deliberate, physical confrontations designed to overwhelm officers in volatile, high-stress situations. The guide itself admits such actions may constitute assault, and these were precisely the sort of actions that Mr. Priddy was engaged in when he met his maker. These events, while tragic, are predictable as a result of left-wing extremism. The Marxist will happily use people as useful idiots and throw them into the line of fire in order to achieve their ends. That is why I believe that the president should move immediately to enact the Insurrection Act of 1807. The Constitution and federal law prohibits the president from using armed military on U.S. soil, with one notable exception, the Insurrection Act of 1807. It is clear, we'll talk about this on the other side, that what we're facing is a highly organized insurrection. These are not random, spontaneous protests, and I believe the time is right for the president to enact that constitutional protection. The first responsibility of the president of the United States is to maintain order and to protect the safety and security of the American people. Those who seek to test Donald Trump don't know what they're messing with. I'm Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show, and we'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to The Roger Stone Show. Not only do I think we are witnessing a highly organized paramilitary agitator network operating openly in Minneapolis in an open act of insurrection, but I also believe a part of this is a distraction from the epic level of corruption that has been uncovered in Minnesota, run by these Somali-based nonprofits that have gobbled up literally hundreds of millions of dollars of our tax money. It is not only outrageous that Governor Tim Walz mobilized the National Guard only to utilize the Guard to protect the protesters rather than to protect the federal agents doing their duty, but earlier this week he also declined to provide security for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who was visiting Minneapolis on behalf of the administration. Bessent, of course, is involved in the effort to, with the Justice Department and under the direction of Vice President J.D. Vance, to examine very carefully this network of nonprofits and NGOs, many of which are receiving our tax dollars for the purposes of fomenting violent revolution. To me, the Rubicon was crossed at the juncture that violent BLM protesters invaded a Christian church in Minneapolis, a Capital Church, I believe it's called, and disrupted a religious ceremony, religious service in progress. This is not acceptable free speech. This is not peaceful protest. That is vile. And that is, if you see that video and you watch the look of fear in the face of the children who were there, it is, I think, the first step towards the president's need to take direct action. The United States is once again facing a constitutional and civil crisis. Not this time on some distant battlefield, but right there in the streets of Minnesota, where violence has escalated and civil order has completely frayed. What began as protests tied to the federal immigration enforcement has metastasized into a full-blown insurrection. And when we come back, I want to talk specifically about my good friend James O'Keefe. James O'Keefe was actually in danger yesterday. He and a full crew from O'Keefe Media on the ground in Minnesota, menaced by these protesters. But O'Keefe's own words and video reveal how incredibly well organized the radicals are. So this is not some indigenous, spontaneous protest against ICE. This is a tightly organized insurrection. And there is a very substantial difference. I do think the president has to be judicious in his use of power. The Constitution specifically prohibits the use of armed military on domestic soil, with one exception. That is the Insurrection Act of 1807. President Dwight Eisenhower used it when the state refused to enforce federal desegregation laws in Little Rock. He sent the 101st Airborne Division to protect the civil rights of American children in Little Rock. Both Presidents Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson used the Insurrection Act to quell violence, resistance, and civil rights enforcement across the South during their presidencies. It was used again after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. And, of course, President George H.W. Bush used the act to deploy federal troops to Los Angeles after riots exploded following the Rodney King verdict. It is a major decision by President Donald Trump, but between the disruption of a Christian mass, the violent armed assault on ICE agents, and one ICE agent getting his finger actually bitten entirely off, I believe it's time for the president to act, and I have respectively urged him to do so. We'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. A little later in the show, we're going to be joined by Eduardo Bitar, who is emerging as the head of the pro-democratic forces in Venezuela, the real opposition. He's going to give us a lowdown on what is happening there, where, as you know, unlike previous presidents who resorted to regime change, Donald Trump went in with a lightning strike, a law enforcement action backed by U.S. military to arrest and extract strongman Nicolas Maduro. This is going to be an epic interview. I hope you stick around for it. Meanwhile, we're focusing on what's happening on the ground in Minnesota. Undercover journalist James O'Keefe, a longtime friend of mine, now with O'Keefe Media, issued a chilling warning after documenting what he describes as a highly organized paramilitary agitator network operating openly in Minneapolis with tactics that he says rival cartel surveillance operations. O'Keefe was embedded in Minneapolis doing reporting around the same time as Antifa radical Alex Pretty died after provoking an ICE agent. O'Keefe recounted being tracked down continuously across multiple locations after his cover was blown, despite switching sites 3 times. According to his chilling testimony, agitators maintained spotters not only downtown but throughout surrounding suburbs, hotels, and major corridors, making evasion nearly impossible. Even more alarming, O'Keefe describes entering what appears to be a police-free autonomous zone in the middle of the city where officers had reportedly been ordered to leave. That is the area that Governor Tim Walz has the Minnesota National Guard protecting. So the National Guard has been mobilized not to protect ICE agents doing their job. And I repeat yet again, 70+% of those who have been detained by ICE for deportation because they're here illegally have a criminal record either here in the United States or in their country of origin. This is a fact that very often gets lost. But here's what my friend O'Keefe said. And I'm quoting James O'Keefe now. I've never experienced anything quite like today in my life. I've interacted with the cartel and I've witnessed some crazy things in the desert in 2024. But what strikes me is how organized these agitators in Minneapolis are. They have spotters everywhere in the city and suburbs, street corners, even 30 minutes away from downtown. They have people at every hotel that work with them and signal to them, which made it difficult for me to lose our tail once our cover was blown. Usually I lose a tail, but not this time. We switched locations 3 times. I recorded and posted this while leaving Wayzata, where they are still surveilling. That, of course, is a town in Minnesota. We all agreed that we must make the threats public as soon as possible, even if we had people still in the field with hidden cameras. I should say O'Keefe actually posted a photo of a text message he received telling him what kind of vehicle he was driving in, the Florida license plate of that vehicle, and warning if he did not leave within 30 minutes, he would be dead. Their words. Around noon, another activist and citizen journalist, Cam Higbee, released a report on the signal threads that were revealed to expose the enormous coordination by the radicals. No police presence whatsoever in this so-called autonomous zone. The police had been told to leave. When I identified myself as a journalist, and they said they will kill the press and would not allow me to leave. My skin was fully covered because it was so cold. Because they couldn't verify who I was, they actually screamed and started throwing ice bottles at them. And this would be O'Keefe and his crew. One hit one of the members of O'Keefe's crew, a Marine who was with him. They actually patted this American citizen down as if they were the authorities attempting to confiscate any weapons. They were set to destroy O'Keefe's vehicle before they got away. They have a full video report coming of this. I really can't wait to see it, but the bigger picture is more important. James O'Keefe says he's angry. Well, I'm angry too, but not at the agitators. I'm already angry at the people who don't understand what we're dealing with and don't seem to be prepared to do anything about it. When I got to the suburbs, I felt I had been in a simulation. I believe American people need to warm up. The president understands what's going on. This moment is a warning about where we are headed. Fear pushes people to care only about their money and their families. I get it. But when fear turns inward, with self-preservation and greed now replacing moral courage, evil goes unchallenged. As history shows, that which we ignore today will come for all of us tomorrow. Ironically and incredibly, I see that these communists do not fear death in the same way most good people seem to. The only thing the communists fear is exposure itself, and that's good news because that is, at this point, our only option. I am deadly serious about investigating the prosecutors themselves if they don't hold these Minnesota fraudsters and violent mobsters accountable for what they're doing. We all are awaiting the videos put forward by O'Keefe Media. Meanwhile, Don Lemon has still not been arrested. Don Lemon did not merely cover a protest. He actually embedded himself in a confrontation that escalated into an alleged criminal disruption of a Sunday worship service inside the city's church in St. Paul, Minnesota, a scene where activists burst into the sanctuary, shouting political slogans, and forced ordinary Americans to endure intimidation in the middle of prayer. Lemon live streamed from inside the church for hours, moved into the church with agitators, and then publicly denounced the churchgoers afterwards, accusing them of entitlement and even invoking white supremacy. It is notable that Lemon interviewed those who disrupted the church before they took that illegal action. But he didn't report it to law enforcement, of course, and he can actually be seen kissing one of the agitators at the end of their interview. Don Lemon was once the polished face of corporate television, a man who spent decades lecturing the American public from behind CNN's glowing studio glass. He was marketed as a journalist, promoted himself as a truth teller, and elevated as a moral authority by the same media machine that now pretends he's yesterday's news. But Lemon's career was never built on the pursuit of objective truth. It was built on performance, ideology, and the smug presumption that half the country exists to be corrected. I remember all too well when Don Limon, as my friend Tucker Carlson calls him, said that the largest single problem in the country today was white males. I don't think so. Like so many legacy media fixtures, Don Lemon learned the fastest way to climb was to align himself with the progressive orthodoxy. When the Democrats needed an amplifier, Lemon obliged. When Donald Trump became the establishment's designated villain, Lemon turned nightly broadcasting into a ritual of insinuation, character assassination, and smear. There is no one who was more gung-ho in promoting the fake Russian collusion hoax, no one more gung-ho in promoting the two completely fraudulent and baseless impeachment attempts against President Donald Trump. There was no one who was a greater cheerleader for the outrageous Fedsurrection of January 6th. There was no one who was a bigger cheerleader for the lawfare that was employed in an effort to arrest Donald Trump, break Donald Trump financially, and incarcerate the president, at the same time keeping him off the ballot in some 50 states. In April of 2023, it was CNN terminated Don Lemon after years of controversies and his disaster tenure on a morning show format that the network could not rescue. In other words, his ratings were horrific. There was no one watching. I myself don't get my news from CNN for the same reason I don't drink out of the toilet. But this wasn't about CNN suddenly discovering ethics. This was CNN practicing survival. Even the network that helped convert news into political lawfare decided that Don Lemon himself was too toxic to keep. After his firing, Lemon attempted to reinvent himself as a digital truth broker with the Don Lemon Show on X. That experiment disintegrated almost immediately after his interview with Elon Musk, after which Musk scrapped their partnership. Lemon then sued Musk over the collapse, alleging false promises and money owed. But none of that is accurate because anyone can post a show on X. That is, of course, the genius of it. But the real Don Lemon implosion was not about ratings or contracts. It was about behavior. A church is not a political arena. It is not a street corner. It is not a stage for ideological or political harassment. It's a sacred space where Americans gather to worship God in peace. Yet activists entered the church during a service and interrupted worship, and Don Lemon was there filming, narrating, broadcasting as this intimidation politics were simply the news. This is, in fact, the sickness of the modern left. They don't merely disagree with institutions they despise, they seek to invade them. They seek to shame them. They seek to punish them. They seek to destroy them. They have abandoned persuasion and replaced it with confrontation. The most dangerous lie they tell, the lie that Don Lemon embodies, is that confrontation is somehow morally virtuous, even when it crosses into criminality. That is the sad story of Alex Petty, the armed man who did draw his gun in a confrontation with ICE officers. I, too, have watched the video. Because violence doesn't begin with a punch, it begins with a premise. The premise is that your political opponent is not merely wrong, but evil. That they are not merely disguised, but a threat. That the institutions they build and cherish are illegitimate, and they must be disrupted, humiliated, and conquered. As I've written in the past, this rhetoric is not harmless, it's an accelerant. When the media teaches that ICE agents are inherently criminal, that law enforcement is inherently oppressive, and that traditional churches are inherently suspect, it does not merely poison political discourse. It creates a permission structure for intimidation, harassment, and sadly, eventually, violence. That's how the mob is trained to believe it is righteous even when it is trespassing on the liberties of others and acting with criminality. So what is Don Lemon's current legal status? Well, as of today, federal prosecutors sought charges tied to the Minnesota church incident. Bravo to Attorney General Pam Bondi for doing so, but a federal magistrate judge appointed by Joe Biden declined to approve the criminal complaint at that stage, citing insufficient probable cause. A federal appeals court also declined to order a lower court to sign arrest warrants connected to the incident involving Lemon and others. That does not mean that Lemon is cleared in any meaningful way. It means that prosecutors did not meet the threshold at that moment, at that particular procedural moment. However, two of those involved in this assault in the church have been charged, although incredibly, they were charged and released, when I think they should have been charged and kept in custody, because they're quite definitely violent and dangerous. That does not mean, again, that prosecutors will not come back and attempt again to charge Don Lemon, and that they won't charge others who were involved. What would normally happen in law enforcement, of course, is pressure those who have been arrested to turn over the names of the others who assaulted a church. If you enter sacred spaces to enable disruption, if you partner with agitators to intimidate citizens, and if you use your platform to rationalize it afterward, you're not a journalist. You're part of the mob, and America is now paying the price. I believe Don Lemon should be prosecuted just as he believed that I should. The difference was Don Lemon actually did something wrong. Where he lost me was when I watched him on one New Year's Eve where he was wearing an impeccable tartan dinner jacket with a shawl collar, a freshly starched shirt, but then committing the worst sin of all, no bow tie, not even a clip-on. That's Don Lemon. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. And when we come back, Eduardo Bitar, the leader of the Democratic opposition in Venezuela, joins us to talk about what is happening in that island nation. Don't go away.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. Joining me now is Eduardo Bitar. Eduardo began his political activism back in 2007, shortly after enrolling at the University de Oriente in Venezuela. That year, he was elected to the University Council after surviving a violent attack by pro-government Chavista activists that almost resulted in his death. This episode marked the beginning of a dynamic political career. I met Eduardo during President Donald Trump's inauguration in 2024. And Eduardo is probably the most confrontational, the most stoutly pro-democratic, small d, a libertarian who has exposed others who in this case pretend to be part of the opposition, but who have in fact collaborated with the brutal regime in Venezuela. he has participated in all the presidential elections in his home country, but was forced into hiding after Venezuela's authorities accused him of leading right-wing extremist groups. In recent weeks, he's been recognized by the Bolsonaro family of Brazil, as by my good friend Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, and many, many others as the legitimate voice of the democratic opposition in Venezuela, and we are pleased to have him with us. He has founded his own political movement dedicated to democratic ideals, Rumbo Libertad. Eduardo, welcome to the Roger Stone Show. You seem to be having an audio issue there. All right, so I'm going to move on and just to talk a little bit about this. Many people have criticized Donald Trump. First of all, there's the claim, which is a false one, that there is a hypocrisy in the lightning raid in which Maduro was arrested for narco trafficking, backed by the U.S. armed military, a stunning act in which not a single American service person gave their lives. This is very different than the boots-on-the-ground regime change wars promulgated under our last three presidents, whether it is Joe Biden in Ukraine, whether it is Barack Obama, or whether it was George Bush, or even before that, Bill Clinton. This is what Trump has now done multiple times, which is the direct projection of American power on a limited basis. This is what we saw in Iran. There was great consternation within President Trump's base about whether he should or should not move aggressively to destroy the nuclear weapons development program in Iran. Some elements on the American right were advocating for a full-scale invasion, which could have been both costly and not necessarily, as we learned the hard way in Afghanistan and in Iraq, not necessarily successful. Instead, the president did limited strikes on the nuclear facilities in Iran, which I believe, based on the military experts that I respect, have been disabled and at least knocked back for decades. At the same time, we now see that projection of power, that limited projection of power, I think also helped lead to what is happening on the ground in Iran today. The Iranian regime is so incredibly brutal that I'm not sure Americans can appreciate the courage of those in Iran who continue to demonstrate against the regime. The regime is teetering. Of that, there is no doubt. And my friend, former Senator Robert Torricelli, Democrat of New Jersey, but a keen observer of foreign affairs, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee when he sat in the U.S. Senate, someone who's long had relationships with the Democratic opposition in Iran, tells me that the reports of 12,000 people being killed are woefully low, and that number is probably closer to 20 to 25,000 people. The president has warned the Iranians not to use violence against their own people, but so far he has shown restraint, and I think that warning may have saved as many as 800 lives. I'm Roger Stone. We'll be back in the Roger Stone Show here momentarily and see if we can't connect with Eduardo Bitar.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. As promised, joining me now, I think, is the legitimate leader of the Democratic opposition in Venezuela. After long due diligence and study, I have concluded that Eduardo Bitar is the right man to lead the Democratic forces forward in that country. After decades of activism, he was forced into exile due to political persecution and targeting by the Maduro government. Throughout that entire time, Eduardo Bitar remained a vocal critic of the Chavistas and the socialist opposition and has maintained his firm commitment to Republican values and individual liberty, which is why more and more people, opinion leaders in this country, and even some around President Donald Trump recognize that Eduardo Bitar has a vital role to play in Venezuela's democratic future. Eduardo, welcome again to the Roger Stone Show.
Hola Roger, es un gusto enorme estar nuevamente contigo.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Roger.
So I have reached my conclusion after doing very substantial study. I understand that Maria Corina Machado is seen by many as the face of the opposition, but when you dig a little deeper, that doesn't really hold up. Why do you argue that Venezuela does not have a real opposition, but rather a coordinated system between Chavismo and the so-called democratic opposition?
Bueno, porque esta opofiction, como yo la llamo, tiene 27 años llevándonos al fracaso.
Because this opofiction, as I call it, has 27 years bringing us to failure.
Todos ellos pertenecen a la Internacional Socialista.
All of them belong to the International Socialist.
Han estado haciendo acuerdos que son realmente incompetentes y alineados con la ideología marxista.
They're making incompetent agreements that are all aligned with the Marxists.
If elections are therefore meaningless under criminal tyranny, what's the real solution? In other words, how does it differ from the failed attempts that we've seen in the past? There have been attempts to support a democratic opposition, I think heavily funded by our own Central Intelligence Agency, but if we wish to get to democracy, what is the answer?
Realmente tenemos que terminar lo que acaba de comenzar el presidente Trump. Creo que el presidente Trump hizo la primera fase de la acción.
Really, we need to finish what President Trump has just started. He just did the first phase.
Creo que la acción es remover todo el grupo criminal del poder.
The action to take is to remove the entire criminal group of the power.
Si no removemos inclusive a Delcy Rodríguez y al resto del chavismo, el chavismo va a regresar con más fuerza.
If we do not remove all of the chavismo, including Delcy Rodríguez, the chavismo is going to come back even stronger.
Inclusive, si nosotros permitimos que la opofiction tome el poder, el chavismo retorna al poder.
Even though if we allow the opposition to return to power, they will come back to power.
I was very pleased to see that you went to Davos, a place where I don't think I would have been terribly welcome. This was a meeting of the World Economic Forum. Kudos to President Donald Trump for basically telling these globalist elitists that their new world order plan was in tatters and that America First was back in here to stay. What was your goal in going to Davos, and did you accomplish your aims in going there?
Bueno, Roger, creo que hasta ahora no hemos terminado. Acá han sido reuniones a cada rato. Inclusive estoy en una de ellas en este momento. Hice una pausa.
It's been non-stop meetings. It has not finished yet. As a matter of fact, I was in a meeting and I took a break from that meeting to be able to take this with you.
Han sido reuniones sorprendentes con mucha gente de poder, mucha gente interesante.
These have been surprising meetings with a lot of people of power and interesting.
Principalmente del área privada que están interesados en invertir en Venezuela.
Mainly from private sectors that are interested in investing in Venezuela.
En todas las áreas que Venezuela tiene potencial.
In all the areas where Venezuela has potential.
Well, we're very grateful that you took a break from your meetings there, where I understand you are meeting with people who have a real interest in a democratic Venezuela, and we're very grateful to have you on the show again today. You claim that your movement, Rumbo Libertad, represents a real break from Venezuela's entire traditional opposition. What do you mean when you say that?
Yo quiero decir que estamos destinados a cambiar el destino de nuestro país.
I want to say that we are destined to change the destination of our country.
Venezuela tiene el mismo tiempo que Cuba en una falsa democracia.
Venezuela has the same amount of time as Cuba in a fake democracy.
Desde el año 1958 gobierna la socialdemocracia y la izquierda en Venezuela.
Since 1958, the social democracy governs Venezuela.
Ellos generaron al chavismo en el poder.
They allow the chavismo to get to power.
Y nuestro propósito es acabar con esa élite que destruyó nuestro país.
And our purpose is to destroy that elite that is ending or finishing up with our country.
Tenemos que trabajar para construir una nueva élite que trabaje en función de los venezolanos.
We have to work to build a new elite to work in favor of the Venezuelan people.
Inclusive, Roger, si nosotros no producimos una libertad real, los venezolanos en los Estados Unidos y en el mundo no van a regresar a Venezuela.
Even if we do not, Roger, build a real freedom, the Venezuelan people in the United States and around the world are just not going to come back to Venezuela.
Además de eso, es importante que el presidente Trump tenga una victoria total sobre la situación de Venezuela.
And additionally, it is important that President Trump has a total win over the situation that is today in Venezuela.
Si esto no sucede de esta forma, va a ser muy cuestionado.
If this does not happen this way, then everything is going to be very much questioned.
Inclusive por muchos venezolanos.
Even by some Venezuelan people.
Yo estoy convencido que lo que hizo el presidente Trump generó mucha expectativa y mucha felicidad en los venezolanos.
I'm convinced that what President Trump did generated a lot of happiness among all the Venezuelan people.
Pero el liderazgo venezolano de nuevo traicionó al presidente Trump con mentiras.
But the leadership of Venezuela again betrayed Trump with lies.
Hicieron lo mismo que Juan Guaidó en el pasado.
They did the same thing as Juan Guaidó in the past.
So what then differentiates your strategy from the decades of those failed attempts against the chavismo?
Fallaron.
Nuestra estrategia se basa en la irrupción política.
Our strategy is based in the political disruption.
Tenemos que ver lo que pasó, por ejemplo, en Siria recientemente.
We have to see, like, for example, what happened recently in Syria.
Pero con la diferencia de quien debe llegar al poder tienen que ser las personas correctas.
But with the difference that the people that will arrive to the power has to be the correct people.
O provocar en Venezuela un choque total contra el chavismo que los ponga a correr fuera del terreno.
Or just generate a impact against chavismo that makes them run out of the terrain.
Y que provoque inmediatamente que haya un gobierno por aclamación en Venezuela.
And generate a government by acclamation in Venezuela.
Los venezolanos están esperando una persona que les salve.
Venezuelans are waiting for a people to save them.
Y el presidente Trump necesita un venezolano esté alineado a su mensaje y a su narrativa.
And President Trump needs a Venezuelan that is aligned with him in the process and in the narrative.
Yo creo que el presidente Trump quería continuar con lo que inició, pero lamentablemente no estaba una persona lista para asumir ese proceso.
I believe Trump wanted to continue with his plan, but unfortunately there was no one set up there in place to follow up.
Por eso estamos en Davos inclusive. Queremos acelerar el proceso para acompañar al presidente Trump a terminar el trabajo.
That's why we are here in Davos. We want to continue the work with President Trump to complete the job.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Eduardo Bitar. He is emerging as the principal leader of the Democratic opposition in Venezuela. I have found him to be an extraordinary truth teller, also a very dynamic, small d Democrat, believer that the future of Venezuela depends very much on making the right decisions moving forward. Eduardo, realistically, how soon do you believe Venezuela could have a free, fair, honest presidential election?
Yo creo, Roger, que tenemos que pasar por un proceso principalmente de transición.
I think we need to go through a process of transition.
Un gobierno especial que ponga orden en Venezuela.
A special government to put order in Venezuela.
Un gobierno que no se base en la constitución socialista chavista.
A government that is not based on the Chavista constitution.
Y que podamos volver a nuestro inicio con la Constitución de 1811 inspirada en los Estados Unidos.
And something that will allow us to go back to our original Constitution in 1811, which is based out of the Constitution of the United States.
Esa Constitución, con unas enmiendas, podría darle a todas las personas que quieran invertir en Venezuela y a los mismos venezolanos una oportunidad.
that constitution updated to today's will give a great opportunity to all the Venezuelan people.
Nosotros con unos decretos especiales podemos encauzar a Venezuela hacia el futuro.
We, with some special decrees, can lead Venezuela to the future.
Y después de estabilizarla y garantizar la seguridad jurídica de las empresas que inviertan inmediatamente en Venezuela, poder trabajar en la depuración del sistema de identificación venezolano.
So after we put the right laws in place, people will be able to invest safely in Venezuela, and following that, we'll need to put in place a proper identification system in Venezuela.
Si no hacemos esta depuración total del sistema de identificación venezolano, no vamos a poder tener una elección libre.
If we do not clean up the system of identification, we cannot have a free election in Venezuela.
All right, I'm afraid that we are out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank Eduardo Bitar for joining us from Davos, taking time out of his schedule. I urge you to follow him on X. He is the incredibly dynamic and outspoken true voice of democracy. Both he and I have been criticized because we have exposed the Chivismo background of Maria Corina Machado, who some thought, but not President Trump evidently, was the rightful leader of the Democratic opposition in the country. Eduardo, thank you very much for joining us under these difficult circumstances. Good luck with your meetings today. And my friend, God bless you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, folks, you're listening to the Roger Stone Show right here on the Red Apple Audio Networks, and we'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. In just a little bit, we're going to be taking your phone calls. That number, 800-848-9222, 800-848-9222, or you can email us at askstone@rogerstoneshow.com. We'll also take your questions by email. So, yes, Roger Stone on the phone coming up shortly. That number again, 800-848-9222. Happy to take your calls about current events, news, history, politics, style, fashion, food. It's up to you. No obscenity, please. A nation doesn't have to be invaded to be conquered. It can be bled. It can be chemically sabotaged. It can be hollowed out through a steady attrition of death and despair until entire communities collapse under the weight of funerals, addiction, and fear. And that's exactly what Chinese fentanyl and other poisonous precursors trafficked here in the United States are trying to do to the United States right now, and why the president's decision to designate fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction is not merely rhetorically justified. It's strategically overdue, in my opinion, and necessary to save lives. This is, of course, the real story of the arrest of Maduro in Venezuela. It ended the horrific flow of cocaine into the United States. Most of the fentanyl comes, of course, from Mexico. And the president has warned that he is going to declare war on the cartels if he has not already done so. All of this carnage did not materialize out of thin air. It's not the product of random misfortune or bad luck for the United States. It is the outcome of international pipeline of death. This is particularly true in the case of fentanyl. Chinese production networks and precursor suppliers feeding the Mexican cartels and other narco-terrorist enterprises. When they then move this poison across our borders and into America's towns with the cold professionalism of a wartime logistics operation. This is not merely trafficking. This is a weaponized supply chain. And it's not confined to the United States. Fentanyl is metastasizing across the world because the source of its industrial scale production is not some back alley chemist with a beaker. This is mass manufacturing overseas, unleashed with consequences so catastrophic that any honest observer would be forced to ask whether the damage is an accident at all. When a substance this lethal proliferates across continents at this speed, at this volume, the line between criminal enterprise and biological warfare begins to evaporate. We're not looking at a drug problem. We're looking at a chemical mass death distributed through criminal proxies, notably previously through Venezuela and now principally through over our southern border in Mexico. But we also don't pay enough attention to our northern border with Canada. Our northern border is actually even more porous than our southern border. Because there's Native American lands in some instances as a buffer between the United States and Canada, there's still a large amount of sex trafficking, illegal cigarettes, and yes, illegal drugs traversing our northern border. Anthony Constantino running for Congress in the 21st District of New York, which abuts Canada all the way up in northern New York, has made this a major issue of his campaign, the need to secure our northern border, which has not gotten the focus that our southern border has gotten. So those who say that the arrest of Maduro was about regime change don't understand the horrific danger that was coming from both Venezuela and Honduras. And I will be publishing a paper shortly on drug trafficking into the United States from Honduras that you will find shocking. President Donald Trump standing up to the narco traffickers at long last. Again, we'll be back in the Roger Stone Show, taking your calls at 800-848-9222, 800-848-9222. We await your calls.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. We're taking your calls now at 800-848-9222. Tony in Clifton, New Jersey. Welcome to the Roger Stone Show. You have a question. The question that I see on the board is it possible for Trump to remove Tim Walz? Tony, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Oh, there you are. Great. Welcome to the Roger Stone Show. Tony, I'll let you speak for yourself.
So Roger, Governor Walz has enforced his state as anti-ICE and has therefore encouraged what I call sort of anti-federalist behavior, extremism that has resulted in, I think it's 2 deaths now, because of people who have been groomed to antagonize and interrupt ICE activities. This is now not only just an anti-ICE federal thing, it's people are dying in the state because of his extremism. Can he be removed from his position and the state go into a temporary state of emergency?
Thank you for your question, Tony. I'm not familiar with Minnesota state law, and I don't know what happens there when a governor is subjected to federal criminal indictment. I think Tim Walz had enormous vulnerability even before this recent uptick in violence in his state. It is very clear at a minimum that he knew about, and at a maximum that he may have abetted this massive theft of federal tax money by Somalia-backed NGOs and nonprofit organizations. I saw an incredible video the other day from a citizen journalist who visited 26 different child care facilities, all of them receiving federal funds. He visited each one morning, noon, and night, yet he never saw, and weekdays and weekends, he never saw any children or any adults or any person for that matter. So I think Walsh is likely vulnerable there. I also think now he's mobilized the National Guard, but then he's using the National Guard to protect the protesters, the violent protesters, as opposed to ICE. He, I think, and Mayor Fry of Minneapolis, I think, are both legally vulnerable. But the only way this could be done was through formal federal charges. And then you have the question of whether corrupted and completely biased politically appointed federal judges in Minnesota would be willing to actually sign the arrest warrant and carry out the indictment. We saw that they were unwilling to do so in the case of Don Lemon, who clearly was involved in the attack on a church, which I think violates the law. They have been unwilling to hold the two ringleaders in that assault on a Christian church. They were willing to charge them, but they weren't willing to hold them. So we have a breakdown in our system. We have tyrannical federal judges who are making law from the bench and who don't want to carry out their federal responsibilities. So the short answer to your question is I do think if Tim Walz were federally charged either in the corruption probe or the fact that his campaign manager is now surfaced on Signal as the one coordinating what can only be called an insurrection on the ground, the question then becomes, what did Walz know and when did he know it? Were he to be charged criminally, I believe that he then could be removed as governor. But again, I'm not a lawyer steeped in Minnesota state law. But Tony, thank you very much for your question. Patrick, in Indiana, you have a comment and a question.
Yes. Following up on what she said, I think Governor Walz and Mayor Fry could both be arrested under federal law because the presidential oath of office is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And when the leaders of the states can't or won't do their job, and in this case they won't do their job, Article 6, Section 2 gives the president authority to enforce the laws which the leaders are not doing. Article 6, Section 2 says, this Constitution and laws passed in pursuance thereof, goes on to say that they shall be the law of the land, and there's been laws passed in all states against murder, robbery, and so forth, and they're not enforcing that. And so the president, even without the Insurrection Act of 1808, has a duty, according to his oath of office, to preserve law, because these governors are not doing it. And also, I was wanting to know, don't you think these governors and mayors are responsible for the policy that came out? I heard once, I haven't heard anything about it since, but I heard that there was an issue of issue for ICE agents wanted dead or alive, and nobody but the government could issue something like that.
All right. I thank you very much, Patrick, for your comments. We talked about this earlier. The president has intimated that he's considering enacting the Insurrection Act of 1807. After the chilling testimony of James O'Keefe, which we talked about earlier on the show, we're not up against some indigenous, random, spontaneous, peaceful protests. We're up against a carefully coordinated insurrection. Who's financing all of this, by the way? Who's financing the pallets of bricks? Who's financing the flatbed trucks? Who is who is financing the warm meals, who's paying for the infrastructure of what is a very organized insurrection going on in the state of Minnesota. But Patrick, I thank you for your call. Here's an online question from Terry in Fairfield, Connecticut. Terry says, I see you hitting Steve Bannon on the internet, on social media. I thought you guys were on the same side. What's the story? Well, there's no more appropriate day to ask that question than today, which is the 7th anniversary. I'm not very good at math. The 7th anniversary of FBI agents assaulting my home at 6 o'clock in the morning to arrest me for the entirely fabricated crime of lying to Congress about Russian collusion that never existed. Now, Steve Bannon testified, as I did, under oath to the House Intelligence Committee, and he was asked specifically whether he ever discussed with Roger Stone, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, or the emails that federal prosecutors alleged had been stolen and passed to the Trump campaign, something that never actually happened. And Bannon said, under oath, no, he had never discussed that matter with me. He was asked twice. He said, no, he was quite certain. Imagine my surprise at my trial in Washington, D.C., with federal prosecutors seeking to put me away for 7 to 9 years, even though I had done nothing wrong, when Steve Bannon pops up as a government witness for Robert Mueller and asked the exact same question, whether he ever spoke to me about Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, or these allegedly stolen emails. He said, yes, Stone brought it up in every phone conversation I had with him in 2016, and I considered him our access point to WikiLeaks, which is news to me, because not only did we never have such conversations, but I passed 3 separate lie detector tests proving it. I would point out to you that Steve Bannon pled guilty to embezzling $15 million from the Build the Wall Foundation, and his 2 co-conspirators in that embezzlement served long prison times, but thanks to having a highly connected, slick lawyer in New York City, Bannon pled guilty but served no time. That's curious. I also distinctly remember Steve Bannon saying that Trump was not a billionaire, that the Trump organization was a criminal enterprise. And then, of course, there is his close association with Jeffrey Epstein, which has been proven in the recently released emails and photographs. So I ask you, why would Steve Bannon associate with a man who had already been convicted of sex crimes in Florida? Why would he be, as we saw in the emails, coaching Epstein on his public rehabilitation, telling him in interviews he needs to come across as not threatening, not creepy? He needs to insist that the women that he was pictured with appeared young, but they weren't technically underage. Why would you want to coach a pedophile? Of course, the emails also show that Bannon was actually supposed to travel to Epstein's Island to film what I think was coaching for a 60 Minutes interview. Bannon has subsequently said that he has 15 hours of interview with Jeffrey Epstein that he was going to build into a documentary. Well, when is this documentary going to be released? I think it's scheduled for never. So those are my problems. I put them forward. The Bible teaches us to forgive, and I have, but it does not teach us to forget. And I have not forgotten the treachery of Mr. Bannon, who now believes, in the light of his guilty plea for embezzlement, in light of the complete exposure as an associate of the pedophile child trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, that he, Steve Bannon, is going to run for president, is going to seek the Republican nomination opposing either J.D. Vance or perhaps Marco Rubio or maybe Tulsi Gabbard. Looks to me like Ted Cruz may be joining that race. J.D. Vance, a strong favorite for the Republican nomination as a sitting vice president. But I don't know what Bannon is thinking. If he thinks he can run for president, he's now going to not have the safety of his little podcast where he can control all of the incoming questions. He's going to be asked about why he embezzled from small donors who simply wanted to build our southern wall against illegal invaders. He's going to be asked about his association with the criminal pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. He's going to be asked about why he tried to stab Donald Trump in the back. All those things are facts. They're all documented. So when you say, can't you just forget that? When somebody tries to put you away for 7 to 9 years, knowing that you committed no crime, it's hard to get over. But the Bible's very clear. We have to forgive those that trespass against us. I have, in fact, done that. I have no rancor here, but that doesn't mean the American people should not know the truth. And everything I just laid out there regarding Steve Bannon is the truth. Of course, I'm equally offended by his complete failure to have any kind of standards of hygiene. Why the man does not bathe, why he doesn't shave, why he doesn't wash his hair, why he doesn't brush his teeth, why he reportedly, I haven't seen him in years, but why he reportedly smells. I think those are all very fair questions. You're tuned in to the Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. We're taking your calls at 800-848-9222. And when we come back, we will have time for a few more calls. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. Thank you for joining us for our final minutes. So we're taking your calls at 800-848-9222. Susan in Corning, New York. Susan, you had a question.
Hi, Roger. With all these red states like Minnesota and California now being investigated for massive fraud at the federal level, what about this state, in New York State here in New York City? It's always made me scratch my head how we spend $40 billion just on education in New York City, which is almost 30% of the budget. Yet only 30% of the kids even read at grade level. And that's $40,000 a kid practically. That's just one example. It just seems like there's maybe the teachers union. I don't know. What do you think?
This is the danger of one-party states. I was glad to see the Republicans have found a candidate in Brad Blakeman, who I think is going to put up a heck of a fight. But even Mr. Blakeman would admit that, at least on paper, he's tremendously outnumbered. But when you have one-party rule, it leads to epic corruption. We've already seen what's happening in Minnesota spill over to Michigan, to Ohio, to Washington State, to Oregon. President Trump himself has predicted that before they're finished investigating, you're going to find the same kind of fraud in California. The massive fraud in California surrounding Gavin Newsom. This was predicted to me by Lou Barnett, a Republican activist, longtime Republican activist, was actually the treasurer of the Young Republican National Federation when I was national chairman, ran on my ticket. Very shrewd political operative. Told me months ago that the level of fraud and corruption in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars surrounding the administration of Gavin Newsom would ultimately bring him crashing down. Newsom, of course, went to Davos to try to get an audience, was in the end not allowed to speak. President Trump spoke, but I don't think those globalists and business elites liked what they heard, because he basically told them that their plan for a new world order was in tatters, and that America is back, proud and strong, and that he was no longer going to continue to subsidize foreign wars where the United States had no inherent interest. So I believe that, yes, you're correct. There's massive corruption in New York, and it will take some investigation to uncover it. But this is the problem we have when a mayor and a governor and the legislature and the attorney general are all in one-party hands, and they begin to get sloppy. New York Attorney General Letitia James was charged with mortgage fraud in the Eastern District of Virginia. That case was dismissed not because there was no evidence. The facts of the case were never explored. It was dismissed on a technicality because the judges in the Eastern District ruled incorrectly, by the way, that the temporary prosecutor, the U.S. attorney there, Lindsay Halligan, had not been properly seated. But that doesn't mean that the New York Attorney General, who has prosecuted people for the exact same crime that she herself now stands accused of, is not subject to federal law. For those who say that there is no crime here, I think Sam Antar over at whitecollarfraud.com has demonstrated the epic corruption of Letitia James. And it's not just mortgage fraud, although she has a 43-year history of engaging in mortgage fraud. There's also millions of dollars of fraudulent contributions from people who gave through Act Blue, which is a Democrat payment processing app that her campaign used. When you work backwards and try to trace these contributors who gave millions of dollars, but millions of dollars in serial small contributions, you find either that they don't even really exist as individuals, or when you do contact them, they tell you that they never gave any such contributions. And then there's the filings that are missing, her mortgages that are missing, her loans, yet her state spending filings demonstrate that, she used state funds to fly to Martha's Vineyard the same weekend that she rented a B&B on the beach. So I think there's epic corruption in New York State, and probably not until you elect a new governor, hopefully, I believe Bruce Blakeman, but a new governor, are we going to get to the very bottom of it. President Trump has his hands full, but everything that has happened in Minnesota, or that pattern will repeat itself in Ohio, in Michigan. It's already seeing vestiges of it in Washington State and in Oregon. The president himself has suggested that New York State will have the same kind of fraud. I think he's right. All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. Until next time, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Roger Stone Show. You can hear The Roger Stone Show Sunday afternoons at 3. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.